Good afternoon, everyone, and welcome to Providence DocTalks. My name is Sherry Scales, and I'm the Director of Development for the Providence Cancer Institute. I'm so excited to have all of you with us today for our DocTalk featuring Dr. David Page and 3 of his patients. Get ready for an educational and inspiring hour. We're going to begin soon, but first I want to offer a quick note and reminder. You are on mute, but we would love to see your questions throughout the presentation. Please feel free to use the question and answer or Q&A feature on your Zoom platform, and we will review questions throughout the presentation as well as at the end. We'll begin our program in 1 short minute with a wonderful introduction by Dr. Walter Earle A, Chief Medical Officer of Providence Cancer Institute and Physician Director of Cancer Research at the Earle A. Chiles Research Institute. Hang on just 1 moment and we'll be right back with you.
Hello, everybody. Thank you again for joining us today for Doc Talks. My name is Walter Earle A, and as Sherry mentioned a couple minutes ago, I'm a medical oncologist and the Chief Medical Officer for the Providence Cancer Institute and Director of Cancer Research in Oregon. I know you're going to enjoy today's presentation from Dr. David Page and some of his patients who will tell you a wonderful story about the successes of immunotherapy in breast cancer. Now, I know many of you, and I know many of you have been supporters of our efforts, which now are going into their 29th year since we established our immuno-oncology center here at the Earle A. Chiles Research Institute at Providence. Lots happened in those 28 years. It was about 11 years ago that we were first able to show that the vision that the immune system in patients could be activated in such a way that it would make tumors go away was first realized in patients. The first patients were melanoma patients. The study that was done was actually done and led by investigators here in the Earle A. Chiles Research Institute at Providence. It was an incredibly important advance. A lot has happened since then. There are now other immunological agents that are available to treat patients with cancer. And I think you probably hear about them regularly, even if you don't realize it, but all those TV commercials for Opdivo and Keytruda, those are all examples of effective immunotherapies that are now out there, because of work that we were a part of and work that many of you helped support. In addition to having other agents, the drugs don't just work in melanoma, they work in a variety of other tumor types as well. The second tumor that was shown to be treated effectively with immunotherapy was lung cancer. Huge advance in the management of patients with lung cancer. And then, it works in bladder cancer, it can work in ovarian cancer, it can work in other kinds of cancers as well. And eventually, we were able to show that in a subpopulation of breast cancer patients, immunotherapy is a very promising tool as well. And today, we're very lucky to have one of the world's experts on immunotherapy for breast cancer. It's my pleasure to introduce Dr. David Page, who is a graduate of the University of Chicago, where he had a BA with honors. Went on to medical school at Northwestern, and following medical school, did his internship and residency at Columbia University in New York City. And from there, did a fellowship at the Memorial Sloan Kettering Cancer Institute. And it was at that time that he worked with some of our friends and colleagues who were very, very instrumental in the development of immunotherapy as a tool for oncologists. And it was there that he got his training in breast cancer, immuno-oncology, and we were fortunate enough that about 6 years ago, we were able to recruit Dr. David Page to Providence, and he has been an amazing colleague and partner, loved by his patients, his colleagues, and has done some really incredible work. And it's my pleasure to introduce him today, along with some of his friends and patients, to share with you some of the wonderful progress that's been made in the treatment of breast cancer using immunotherapy. David?
Thank you. Can you guys see and hear me before I jump into the presentation? I'm looking at the attendees list, and it's just so exciting to see such a great turnout. A lot of people that are members of the team at Providence to cure breast cancer are on there. Nikki Moxon's our nurse, research nurse. And I even see our statistician has joined on, Su-Ching Chang, thank you. And then Walt Bowen is present. I just want to make a very important point that Walt has supported us over the years to accomplish these research goals that that we're going to present today. And I'm just very supportive of that. And I also see some of my patients on the list, so very exciting. So let's dive into it. I called this presentation Teaming Up to Finish Cancer because it truly takes a village in order to push the bar forward for curing breast cancer. And today we're going to be talking very specifically about a type of breast cancer called triple negative, which is a cancer where there's an unmet need. We have to really double down on research to improve outcomes in this type of cancer. So can you move forward to the next slide? This is my initial agenda. Really, my role for this presentation is to give you just enough context so that my patients who have been participants of the trials can step in and offer their testimonials. I think that's really the most impactful way to learn about these clinical trials is to hear from the source. But before we do that, for those in the audience who aren't familiar with triple negative, we're going to go over a little bit of the biology. And then we're going to introduce the notion of immune therapy for breast cancer. What is immune therapy and how could it help to improve the cure rate in this disease? And then finally, I'd love for this to be interactive. So I'm going to be keeping an eye out on the question and answer section. If you'd like to type in questions along the way, I'll be monitoring and I may interject with answers, but we'll have plenty of time at the end as well. So let's move into what triple negative cancer is. I've tried to pare this down to the most important concept. When somebody's diagnosed with breast cancer, they usually by mammogram, or sometimes they might feel a lump in the breast. It's a very anxiety-provoking visit. There's just tons of information thrown at patients. But I always try to boil it down to the most relevant, which is how are we going to cure this cancer for the patient? And although there's a lot more data behind it, we tend to try to distill cancers into three important factors that could be used to guide therapy. We test these by actually taking a piece of the tumor on a biopsy and staining them under the microscope with different types of stains. And there's three of them in particular that are the most relevant. One is the estrogen receptor, the other one progesterone receptor, and then the third one is called HER2. What does this mean? Well, the first two are kind of ring a bell for most people. These are female sex hormones. This is what differentiates men versus women. Men also have testosterone. Why is this relevant for breast cancer? Well, it turns out that even healthy, normal breast tissue is quite responsive to estrogen and progesterone. And this is why women, as they have cycles from month to month, can feel changes in the breast. So when a breast tissue becomes cancerous, it tends to hijack that system, and it's highly responsive and grows with female hormones. And for that reason, one of the most powerful ways that we can help to treat breast cancer to improve the cure rate is by blocking hormones, so both estrogen and progesterone. And we have medications that have saved millions of lives in their pills. And then there's the third one, which is HER2. Not many people have really heard or understood about HER2 unless they're doing a lot of research in breast cancer, but this is a very specific type of machinery in some breast cancers that can drive the growth of the cancer and can make the cancer quite aggressive. And thankfully, we've developed with research medicines that can neutralize this process, turn off the machinery, and actually help bind the cancer with the drug so the immune system could see that cancer and kill the cancer. So those are medicines called antibody therapies against HER2. Now, what's the problem with triple negative? The problem is that none of these are relevant. When you test for estrogen, progesterone, and HER2, they're all negative. And this is what triple negative means. When this happens, of course, patients could still be cured, but we often have to use our kind of backup plan, which is chemotherapy, which could be quite demanding on patients with a lot of side effects. And although it cures many, many patients, there's still a subset of patients that will not be cured despite very intense chemotherapy. So this is where immune therapy, the wave of the future for triple negative, comes in. You can go to the next slide. Here we see the pathway for cure. This is a very long journey for treating and curing triple negative breast cancer, on the order of a year. On the left, we see an illustration of how breast cancer is most often diagnosed in this disease. A woman will actually feel a lump. The reason why it's not usually a mammogram is because these cancers can grow quite quickly. Once diagnosed with triple negative breast cancer, we embark upon a 6-month journey of very intensive chemotherapy. And the patients can kind of give you their perspective on that when we introduce them. And then finally, the obvious part of treatment is you want to remove the cancer. So women will either have a lumpectomy or a mastectomy. And that's a very critical point in the path to cure, is the surgery. At that point, we've removed all the known cancer in the breast, but we have to, really consider whether there might be cancer left behind in other parts of the body, and if we need other treatments. So what we do is we have another type of doctor, a pathologist, look underneath the microscope at the tumor bed that was removed, and they make a designation of whether or not there's any cancer left behind that may not have responded to chemo. So there's a good, very lucky chunk of about 30% of patients where all the cancer is completely obliterated by the chemo, and that's called a complete response. And that's a very good sign of likelihood of cure. And then there's other groups of patients, the majority of them have some residual cancer there that did not fully respond to chemo. And that could be just a tiny amount, or it could be a large amount. And that indicates that there's a thought that we might want to pursue other therapies to help cure that patient. And then finally, this finishes with radiation. Let's go to the next slide. Where does immune therapy fit in? Well, especially for those women where there is not a complete response, we want to think about new treatments. Immune therapy really makes a lot of sense because you're harnessing your own body's defenses against the cancer. And recently we have an FDA approval, the first one for triple negative breast cancer, with a medicine called Keytruda. And we have been studying Keytruda, offering it to patients years in advance before the FDA approval here at Providence through the research protocols that we have. The way this medicine works is it's actually quite simple in its mechanism. When you look at immune cells, the T cells on the bottom of this diagram, these T cells are capable of killing cancer, but there's a kind of a natural off button on T cells that turn them off. Of course, you need to have off switches on the immune system. If it's kept on forever, patients would never recover from illness or infection. The problem is that cancer could hijack that, and they can kind of tickle those buttons and turn off the T cells. And Keytruda works by preventing that from happening. It binds those off switches and keeps the T cells running. Now, let's see how much of an impact it has on triple negative. Next slide. Here we see a diagram. This is called a Kaplan-Meier curve. Not everybody is familiar with this, but this is kind of the doctor's medical oncology figure of choice to show whether a medicine works. On the x-axis, you see the amount of time that a patient's followed. So this is up to 51 months here. And then on the y-axis, you see a percentage. And ideally, you would want the line going across the top to stay at 100%, because that would mean that 100% of women are cured of their cancer, or they don't have any evidence of recurrence. But as you can see, over time, there are some patients that have a recurrence of their cancer. But thankfully, with the addition of the Keytruda in the green line, we see a very substantial improvement in the cure rate with the addition of Keytruda to chemo, going from 76.8 to 84.5% at 3 years. Tremendous. This is actually quite an impactful message. Two messages though. One is that it helps. The other message is that we can't stop here. We need something more, because there's still a good 15% of patients with recurrence at that time point. Next slide. So now let's introduce our patients. I have been very fortunate to have very wonderful relationships with a lot of my patients that I've grown to know these women over the years. And these are just 3 of the volunteers that have participated in Providence-sponsored clinical trials. And I thought it would be very impactful for them to share with you their narrative of being on the trial and to give their description of the trial. But I'm also here in the background to give any more insights about the trial. If there's questions, please feel free to chime in afterwards. The first trial was a phase 1 trial. This was the first trial I did as a participant of the Providence system. In 2015, we designed a trial that would test a next generation immune therapy for breast cancer called IRX. And this is a very unique type of treatment. It could be quite toxic. It's a mixture of hormones that are natural, made by the human body to stimulate your immune system. They're so powerful that if you gave it through the IV, it would make a lot of patients sick or feel flu-like or even hospitalized. But the notion here is that we can harness this very powerful hormone by injecting it into the breast. And that would then allow the drugs to percolate into the most important site, which is where the cancer is originated, and allow the immune system to be activated without causing a lot of side effects. So Laura's going to tell you about that. She paved the way along with the other patients to show that it was safe enough to proceed with other studies. In the second trial with this is with Kirsten is going to be describing that one. This is combining forces with the new FDA approved immune therapy. So combining IRX2 with Keytruda. In this trial, we just opened this year. We already have 7 participants of that trial. And then finally, well, are we going to stop there? No, not only do we have IRX2, but for those patients that do not have a complete response to the Keytruda and IRX and chemo, we have yet another method of employing the immune system. This is with cryoablation. It's a way of freezing the tumor with a probe to release all those proteins that are abnormal from the cancer and allow the immune system to then reinvigorate itself and to see the cancer. So Jennifer is going to talk to you about that one. So let's move on, and I'm going to introduce to you Laura. This is just a diagram. It shows you that there is a tumor in the breast. We inject the IRX into the local area of the tumor, and it percolates through those immune lymph channels and allows for activation. So for this study, we wanted to show that it was feasible for women with breast cancer, and we wanted to prove that it actually activated the immune system. So Laura, I'm going to let you take over.
Okay, thank you for letting me participate in this. I met Dr. Page in July of 2017 and had been diagnosed with HER2 positive breast cancer, which I learned at the time was an aggressive form of cancer, and I was terrified. I had about 2 days to decide whether I was going to be part of the trial. And Dr. Page met with me 2 days in a row to talk me down off the ledge and to sort of tell me what I was going to be doing and what I could find out. And what I learned was that although it may not have any effect, there could be a possibility that I could be boosting my immune system to fight the cancer. And so I decided to participate in the trial. And I went in for 2 weeks every day before my surgery and before my chemo. And basically had the most incredible access to care. In those 2 weeks, I was able to meet the team. I was able to be met compassionately and with all of my questions. And I really found such psychological benefit of getting familiar with the hospital and coming in and having so much support that the actual procedure seemed almost small compared to the benefit I was gaining. By the time I went in for my surgery, I felt about 50% less terrified. And I felt so very lucky to have had this opportunity. And that throughout the time of my year of treatment, that sense of empowerment and agency really stuck with me. And I think it really benefited my whole attitude toward going through this journey. And I just felt so lucky that I met Dr. Page at the right time, right when the trial was starting. And I can't be more grateful for the outcome. At this point, I'm 4 years cancer-free. And I just really so glad that I could participate. And I want to thank you. That was my personal benefit. Of course, the benefit toward research and the future is also, really exciting to be a part of. So that's what I have to say for now.
Thank you, Laura. That was just inspiring to hear. And, with that being said, I wanted to provide just a little more insight as to what the impact of this trial was. It was 16 patients, Laura being one of them, and that was just enough patients to demonstrate that this would be a feasible approach going forward. Of those 16 patients, we were able to finish the therapy for all 16 with very minimal side effects. And then it took about 2 years of intensive study of the tumor samples and of the blood samples that were donated to evaluate whether or not this would actually impact the immune system and potentially help the patient. And that also took a village. It wasn't me. I was basically just the coordinator of all of this intense effort. I had about 5 or 6 students and residents and fellows working with me using modern technologies, a lot of which was feasible because of donations through the foundation and through individual donors. And we've put together about 2 or 3 publications which were accepted for very prominent journals that outline the impact of IRX in breast cancer. We were invited to present the results of this study at the annual immunotherapy conference, which is an international event in Washington, the SITC conference. And importantly, we were able to generate enough enthusiasm to study this in a larger group of patients. So that's where the next trial came in. Trial 2 took me about 2 years of convincing drug companies that there was enough strong evidence here that we should pursue this in combination. So ultimately, after meeting, the company that produces the FDA-approved immune therapy, Keytruda, offered to sponsor the phase 2 study, which is what we're going to be talking about next. If you go to the next slide, it'll introduce that study. And really, it's a simple study. We take the treatment construct that I introduced you to with chemo and Keytruda before surgery, but half the women in this study will get IRX beforehand, the other half will not. And with that, we're able to directly compare whether or not there is a difference in the immune stimulation with the IRX and whether or not the IRX can enhance the response to treatment. Now, there's a little bit of a hiccup here. If you want to really show if something's helping to improve the cure rate, you have to follow the patients for 5, 6, 7 years, and you need studies that are massive on the order of hundreds of patients. So that wouldn't be possible for a smaller study that's at Providence. So what we did is we're using another marker, which is the percentage of women who have a complete response. So when you go to surgery, we can assess how much of that cancer was eliminated, and then we could compare the two arms in a much smaller study. So that's what we're doing. So I'm going to introduce to you now Kirsten, who is one of the first participants of this phase 2 study, and she's going to give you her experience.
Hello, thank you for the introduction, Dr. Page. I first want to talk about how amazing my experience was with the staff at Providence Cancer Center. After 8 months of treatment, I feel that I'm so lucky to get to know a group of healthcare providers that really care about their patients and support their patients. It was an amazing experience to be greeted with a smile from the time you walk into the door, check in with the front staff, work with the general oncology nurses, and meet the incredible research team. I feel like I have made friends for life. I was diagnosed with stage 3 triple negative breast cancer at the age of 34 with a tumor the size of a golf ball, and it was a huge surprise. We hit the ground running and started our research of what to do next. After a month of exploration and working with my healthcare team, I was introduced to Dr. Page and this new clinical trial by Dr. Pippa Newell. She talked about the benefits of participating in clinical trials. She had mentioned to me that patients generally do well or even better on trials because they receive an additional designated healthcare team. After my husband and I met with Dr. Page, we immediately knew that participating in the trial was the best possible solution. Being only 34, I knew I wanted to get the most extensive care as possible and leave nothing on the table. I received the arm of the trial that included 2 rounds of 10 treatments of the IRX2 injections, in addition to chemotherapy and immunotherapy. We began the first treatment day with a dose of immunotherapy and small dose of chemotherapy. Then 3 weeks later, we started the 10 daily injections into my breast with IRX. This part of the treatment was a breeze, and believe it or not, I immediately started feeling a response from my body, and it felt like it was attacking the cancer cells. After this induction phase and before we actually began full chemotherapy treatment, we had an ultrasound that showed a 90% reduction in the tumor by volume. No one believed it at first and thought that the calculations were a misprint by the radiologist. At this point, I knew I was going to crush this cancer and knew that this treatment was working. After we completed treatment, we found that I had a complete response, like Dr. Page mentioned, and that there was no detectable cancer remaining in my body. To look at test results and see the words in each section say no detectable cancer, no detectable cancer, and no detectable cancer, I was beside myself with joy. I really feel the opportunity to participate in this trial for triple negative breast cancer has saved my life and will continue to keep me here in remission for many years to come. I wanted to say thank you again for the amazing support from the Providence Group and my friends and family.
Thank you. You know, I just remember having chills down my spine when I saw that radiology report as well. And not just for Kirsten, you know, just being so happy to see such a great response, but to validate all of this work that we have put into this trial and to really believe in yourself and to believe in your own research and to see it come to fruition after years with a very dramatic and obvious demonstration that it's helping a patient. So thank you for that. So now what are the next steps? Well, it's going to be an uphill battle because believe it or not, despite having 40,000 patients a year with this cancer, thankfully it's quite a rare disease, and we don't have tons of triple negative patients. So we are going to be enrolling as patients are diagnosed in Portland. We've cast a wide net, so patients from other hospital systems are still eligible to participate. I have colleagues at OHSU that have referred their patients over to me to be put on the trial. And then we are going to leverage the Providence system going forward in order to catch as many patients and offer this opportunity to as many as possible. And thankfully, there's been recruitment of a wonderful breast oncology expert, Dr. Parvin Petty in California. She's at the Providence there, and she is going to be opening this trial there as well. So we're going to be using the broad scope of Providence to be enrolling patients as quickly as possible. So now, what about those patients that go through all of this and double down their efforts to get immune therapy and even go on a trial like this IRX trial, but still have residual disease? So, this is actually the majority of patients. We expect that more than half of patients, even with these modern treatment paradigms, are going to have some cancer left behind in their breast. And we did not want to stop there. So what we did is we've worked to have a companion clinical trial for patients with residual disease where we have yet another completely different treatment approach that enables the immune system to kill the cancer. And this is the cryoablation trial. I'm going to go over this illustration, and then Jen is the absolute first participant of this trial. She's going to give you her perspective on her experience. But basically, after finishing all of this treatment, we get an ultrasound and we get an MRI of the breast. And if there's even a small semblance of cancer remaining, we confirm that with the biopsy. And when cancer's there, they're eligible for this study. And what we do is we actually use temperature to freeze and thaw the cancer, and it forms an ice ball within the breast. I personally can't attest if this is painful or not. I'd like to hear what Jen has to say, but I'm glad that she did it anyway, because this has been shown in laboratory studies to be one of the most effective ways of inflaming and aggravating your immune system against the cancer, which is maybe an important missing ingredient of the original treatment. So we're combining that with the same medications that Dr. Earle has introduced in his introduction. The two medicines, Yervoy and Opdivo, that have been proven to improve outcomes in metastatic melanoma. So these are kind of the first immune therapies to be approved. And we know they're quite powerful. Powerful enough that they could cause a lot of side effects, but in this particular trial, we're giving just a small amount of it in order to engender an immune response against the cancer. So, Jen, why don't you pick off where I left off? You can introduce the concept of the trial, and then I'll finish up afterwards.
Sounds good. So I just also want to say thank you to all my friends and family that showed up today to support us. Thank you, Dr. Page, for having an incredible year of healing with you and your team. So I actually was diagnosed in 2020 at the age of 54 with triple negative breast cancer, stage 2A, with a total tumor combination of almost close to 3.7 centimeters, with a little satellite, which is included within that, grade 3. And I found out real quickly from my new primary breast surgeon or care person, Pippa Newell. She was the first person to kind of put us at ease, because everything came in, all this information came in quickly. And it was honestly, through this whole experience, I believe the day of diagnosis and hearing you have cancer is the hardest part that me and my husband actually endured. Was that, what? And what does that mean? So it was wonderful to have Pippa say, well, David is one of my old colleagues. And my husband said, well, Pippa, what would you do? And she said, if it was me, I would do everything I could. And you were quite lucky to be considered and fall into this group of people that possibly qualify for this. So it's the first time we were actually really excited that the tumor was big enough to be part of the trial. So we cheered for that. Went on with the trial. I did the IRX2 injections. And interestingly, I felt little tingling activity that those 2 weeks I was getting those injections right into the breast. And that it's hard not to feel like, you're unleashing a superpower within your body. So I was super excited about that. And Dr. Page, also a very passionate person. Like myself, I'm an artist and love what I do. And I can tell he did. And he emanates that confidence and empowerment that transfers to us as terrified women. All of a sudden, we feel like we're doing something really outstanding, and we really are, something bigger than maybe we'll ever understand in our lifetime, that we're going to be able to help others. So I went on with my treatment. I had Keytruda also, just like Kirsten, and got to the end of my treatment, during which I should say during my entire chemo Keytruda experience, I had wonderful care from the entire staff there, like was said before, now my buddies, and I achieved good blood panels for starters. I actually felt pretty decent most of the time, but did achieve a near complete response, but still had residual tumor left. Was kind of bummed out when I found out after my MRI and ultrasound that it wasn't just gone, because that's what you hope for. But I found out it's very common that that's not always the case. So the cool thing was Dr. Page being proactive and always 5 or 10 or 15 steps ahead with everything, said, hey, Jen, if by chance, it comes out that you have a centimeter or less of tumor left, then you fall under the being able to do this cryo thing. And then I wasn't sure I wanted to do another trial, but I thought, why not? And not only that, I hated the fact that I still had a little bit of tumor. And I thought, how cool is that going to be to go in and get it annihilated and watch it happen in real time? So that was exciting. It was exciting not only for me, but it was exciting for David Page and his staff and the radiation or the radiology department. They never get to do fun research things, so they were out of their minds. They just couldn't wait till that day came. So when I came in there, there were 5 people observing. This is such new technology, and to be a part of it, that was kind of exciting. So I kind of felt like a little bit of a superstar that day. But it was after some numbing, the actual cryoablation was a little bit painful. And that was something they were learning at the time too. I could feel the cold happen, but they were able to numb it up enough that it minimized that. We got to actually watch my little tiny 1 centimeter tumor turn into a 2 centimeter ball of ice right before our eyes. And it was really cool because it was in real time. And honestly, it was just, I don't know. I felt excited to be able to give my body this one more or another considerable chance to recruit my immune system and wake it up and let it do what it's supposed to do. So that was great. And then I had surgery after that, and my surgery went so well. And they said there was pretty much nothing left of the tumor. And they got great margins. My lymph node was negative, and I got to hear those words cancer-free, which was super, super exciting. And this is kind of the sweet spot right now, but the sweeter overall spot about it all is just to be like doing something that's like bigger than ourselves, that'll last and possibly help others. So sorry, I'm getting a little emotional, but it's been such an honor. So anyway, I'm such a crier. So anyway, I guess, just to kind of put it out there, I feel really excited, and it's fun to work with a research team that's excited too. That energy and that like morale, and just having like that fortitude and that empowerment that's very that you get from your team, and being able to know that you're running alongside your team it's pretty badass. So anyway, I think that's my story in a nutshell. But
Thank you. This was just so inspiring for me, and I hope that it was for others as well. And just a couple other things to call out. Not only did you guys volunteer, but both Jen and Kirsten live in Hood River area, and they drove back and forth every day for these treatments for months. And it's very easy to say that something's not going to be feasible. For example, a lot of scientists say, when I'm trying to get funding for these trials, oh, there's not going to be patients that want to get 10 doses of IRX in the breast. And you guys proved them wrong. And this is just a testimonial that it's not all about medicine. It's about curing the patient and helping them to feel empowered. And sometimes it might take 10 trips to the hospital for extra doses of medicines. If that's going to be what it takes to cure your cancer, then so be it. So that being said, we have about not much more than 10-15 minutes. So I want to have opportunity for questions. And I'm going to start reading some of the questions and then answering them verbally. The first one is, what would be the best way to support or donate to help with the fight against breast cancer? Well, I think there's a million ways to support. It doesn't even always have to be financial, but certainly the donations, the financial donations feed directly into these trials. And none of these would have been possible if it wasn't for the donations of community members. So I would ask Sherry to give more details on the mechanisms of donating. Sherry, did you want to say anything about that, or should I go into the next question?
You can go next because I'll address this very question at the very end of our talk here.
And then I'm just going to read this next statement. I don't even read it yet. It's very evident that this trial has tangible, positive physical impact. It's hard to ignore from the testimonials the powerful effect that the trial has on spiritual strength and resilience. Curious if there's evidence of the power of mental resilience in winning the battle against cancer. I think that's an amazing point, and that is smack dab right on target. We know that immunity is directly feeding into the mind-body connection. And when patients feel happy and empowered and less stressed out, the cortisol levels in the blood go down, and they're more resilient. They probably exercise more. And we know for a fact that those are all linked with a more robust anti-tumor immunity. So I think that's true. One of the most impactful data that proves that is there's actually a study done by, I forgot which group it was, but they actually had patients work out on a treadmill for 2 weeks straight before their surgery. And they looked at the amount of immune cells percolating in the tumor before and after breast cancer. And lo and behold, the physical exercise was able to enhance the immune infiltrate into the tumor, which I thought was a very direct answer to the question that the mind-body connection feeds into your ability to clear the cancer with your immune system. Any other questions in the audience? Or?
So David, I've had a couple of questions come through a text. And the first one is something you mentioned earlier. You talked about, you had mentioned that we at Providence had been trialing Keytruda for quite some time, for several years prior to FDA approval. And so is that normal that it takes this long, or what is the best way that we as the community or donors can maybe help move things more quickly toward approval so more women and families can benefit?
Yeah, well, I think supporting these smaller clinical trials through donations, because these are all, these are our studies. We have scientists that collaborate at Providence that come up with a good idea, but it's not the companies running them. Of course, we get some donations and support from the company. We need the drug from the company. But in order to make this happen, we actually need external funds. And this is why it could take 2 years to make an idea happen as a trial. But this is how we got access for women like Kirsten, Jen, and Laura. This is how they got these drugs before they were approved. They were smaller studies that were funded primarily through the community and through the foundation. And they weren't designed to prove definitively that the drugs are going to help. Those studies come later. So now we also have the bigger studies that are run by the pharmaceutical companies that we participate in, because we want access to all of these options for patients. And we put about 5 or 6 patients on the international study for Keytruda. Amongst the probably like 1,000 patients on the study, there was a good handful from Providence. And that's what ultimately was the last straw that was needed to get it approved. So I think for earlier access, it's the homegrown studies like these.
Great, thank you. And then another question I received was around what Kirsten had to share. She mentioned that she's only 34 years old, or was 34 when she got the diagnosis. Is that unusually young for triple negative breast cancer?
For triple negative is actually quite common. It is a different entity. Now, most breast cancers really are kind of byproducts of hormonal stimulation, and estrogen-driven cancers are, generally speaking, more common in women that are postmenopausal, that have had many years of estrogenic stimulation. Triple negatives don't play by those rules. They're a very different type of cancer. When you look at the genetics, it's a very distinct disease, and it tends to affect younger women. And we always double check the genetics, because sometimes it's driven by inheritance, and there's certain families that have genetic disease that's transmitted unbeknownst to the patient in their family, and then you're more at risk of this cancer. So we always have to double check for that as well. But that's a good point. It is a disease that affects the younger women, the triple negative breast cancer.
Great, thank you, Dr. Page. Are there other questions out there? Looks like we've had some comments in the chat. I'm just gonna review them very quickly. There's lots of thanks and praise, and people are so proud. And Laura, Jen, and Kirsten, you've all just been amazing. All three of you are superstars, and we're just so thankful for your time here. There is one more question that just came through. Thank you. How has the consideration of women having the BRCA gene affected their acceptance into the trial?
We have some patients with BRCA because it's so common for this type of breast cancer. I think at least 1 or 2 of our initial 7 patients have the BRCA gene. And they have been, usually this is something that you find after the fact, because it takes a while to get those results. But those patients, I think, could benefit every bit as much as patients that don't have BRCA. For those that don't know, BRCA is a gene that is associated with a very high lifetime risk of breast cancer. And often, if you know that you have the gene, you may even consider removing the breast preventatively after childbearing in order to reduce risk of breast cancer. And there is differences in the biology of BRCA breast cancer to the point where there's actually new medicines specifically that could help those women with that type of cancer. So thankfully, the way that this trial was designed is all-inclusive, so patients could do the immune therapy trial, but then after they're done with surgery, if they have BRCA, they can still pursue other trials. They can still pursue taking pills that are specific to their disease that can help reduce recurrence.
All right, thank you, Dr. Page. Any other questions? We're about coming up on our time. I'll tell you, if you think of additional questions to ask, or you were having trouble typing your question at all, please do contact me at the contact information that you see on your screen. So again, my name is Sherry Scales. I work right alongside Dr. Erba, Dr. Page, and the entire team at the Earle A. Chiles Research Institute. And we have a team of folks just like me at the Providence Foundations of Oregon. So if you know any of us besides me, you can reach out to any one of us with information and questions about how to support. But essentially, you can call our office, you can text me at any time. And if you visit providencefoundations.org/cancer, that'll take you straight to a link on wanting to make a gift. So thank you for those of you who are interested in making a gift. If we didn't mention it earlier, I would like to say that at least 70% of all of this research, not only what Dr. Page talked about, but all of the work that's being done at the Earle A. Chiles Research Institute. It's a community-based hospital, and we rely on community-based funding. So 70% of that cancer research is funded through donations from people just like you listening in, giving through time, giving checks, attending fundraisers like our annual Creating Hope event, remembering us in your estate plans. all of those things are an option to consider. This isn't a fundraiser today, it's an awareness building and a friend raiser. But certainly if you'd like to learn more or get more involved with your time, we would love to have any or both of those gifts. So thank you again for tuning in. We'll hang out for a few more minutes to see if there are additional questions that come through, but we want to thank you again for taking the time to listen to this wonderful talk today. Thank you again, Dr. Page, Dr. Erba, and especially our heartfelt thanks to you, Kirsten, Jen, and Laura, for sharing your inspiring stories. We're all rooting with you.
There was one more question by Lindsay. She asked about women who have family members with triple negative that tested negative for BRCA gene. Are there other factors?
Right,
And
that's the one I thought I was reading. I apologize, and it disappeared off my screen. Go ahead.
yeah, and that actually is true. There are other factors. So genetics are very complicated. There's thousands of genes. We know a good handful of them besides BRCA could increase risk of breast cancer, including triple negative. So we now test for those as well. That's part of the package of the genetic testing. But then the reality is that we're just humans. We try our best, but we don't know the full story of genetics. For example, you could have 2 or 3 genes that look normal, but they may interact with each other and then increase risk of breast cancer. And we just aren't there yet for understanding all of that. So if you have family members with breast cancer, you should be diligent. You should get, be more on the conservative side with getting your mammograms. Don't do it every 2 years, do it every year. Talk to your doctor about getting breast exams. Usually we don't do mammograms and imaging before the age of 40, just because young women, their breasts are very cystic and dense, but at the age of 40, it is a reasonable time to start screening.
Yeah, thank you, David, for answering that for all to hear. Appreciate it.
One quick thing that I'd like to say from Paula. She talks about empowering patients with knowledge and making them part of the team. This is so true, where working with Dr. Page and Nikki and staff really does empower you with feeling like you're part of an experience. And it really was great. So being part of your treatment plan and talking to your staff, to your treatment team, is just absolutely amazing. So with them including us has been wonderful. Thank you.
All right. Well, again, I know most people have started to log off now, but for those of you still here, thank you again for participating, and we'll get any more lingering questions answered. And we look forward to hearing from you if you have want to get involved or have interest in making a gift, or just want to learn more about the incredible things we're doing. Thank you very much.